Hello and welcome to the BC Training Place, the channel where you not only learn about how to work with Business Central, one of, in my opinion, the best ERPs in the mid size range, but also why it works the way it does. And today we're going to investigate how the user permissions work, a topic that has been raised many times, and I've been wanting to make this video for quite a while and somehow never get to it. It's going to be a bit of an improvisation, so we'll see if we manage to cover all the various aspects, and it's probably going to be a bit of a longer one, so I'll see if I can cut it into smaller pieces. So this will most probably be part one of several, but let's see how we go. So, first thing you should probably be aware of is that what I'm covering in this specific video are the permissions which are related to BC in the software as a service deployment of scenario. So when you're working on-prem, there could be a few other aspects to how you manage your on-premise tenant or domain, which I'm not going to cover. And speaking of which, wow, I've been working in this area for more than 20 years now. I'm still technically not an IT expert. So when I'm talking about tenants, domains, and users and so on, that's more of a practical experience I've had rather than a lot of theoretical one. So please excuse any possible inaccuracies. I'll try to basically give you a version from dummies for dummies of how this works. And let's see how we get there. So before we directly talk about the permissions within Business Center, it's probably a good idea to discuss how you would set up your users. And in the software as a service version, you would be creating them in your admin center. Now, whether you do it directly from within the admin Microsoft.com or whether you actually go to the identity, which used to be the Azure admin, it doesn't really matter, but I tend to use this one because it's probably the easiest. Plus, it is the shortcut you get directly from within here. So if you're within your Business Central and you have admin permissions, but you haven't done this, this might be a good primer. You basically click on these dots and you get to the admin center, which opens this menu. And from here, you can go to the users, and then active users are the ones which can work within your tenant. Now, the dummy versions of what a tenant is, it's basically installation. It's think of it kind of like a Windows 4 servers. It's not exactly accurate because that's not an operating system. It's more like a software that sits on top of a Windows installation. In this case, where you get to define your users and where they have access to. So kind of the tenant is, some of you might be familiar with domain controller or something like this. Well, that's several terms that are kind of interchangeable. So it's kind of a layer that sits below all the softwares that you install. And you kind of join the various computers that you have to be part of this tenant, of this domain. So essentially, whenever you log into a computer that's joining your tenant, you need to use one of these users. I'm probably butchering the explanation, but essentially think of it this way. If you have a normal PC that you buy for yourself, if you're like a gamer or whatever, you usually have a choice when you're setting up the Windows, if it's Windows for the first time, whether you want to use local users or whether you join into a work group or a domain. Essentially, the tenant, what we are ministering here, is this domain that you can join, and this essentially defines where the user permissions are defined. So as soon as a computer is joined into a domain, then the users that log into this computer must be part of the domain, other than potentially some local admin users that you can define. But let's not go into there because that's a whole other topic for another video that I'm never going to make on this channel because I'm just not an expert in that area. A long story short, in the SaaS deployment, all your users for BC must be defined here. And there are a few minor exceptions, and we're not going to talk about them today. But those of you who work with APIs might be familiar with OAuth 2. So that will be a different way of setting up a user that can kind of log into Business Central. So we're ignoring that. We're talking about users get access to the UI, to the web client that can open this and play around. So essentially they have to be set up here as active users, and for each of them, so let's go with student 071. I wonder why. Okay, so that's the one I'm going to be using to show you how the permissions work today. So you basically create a new user, you assign a username, password, and you can give them some additional privileges as to become some kind of administrator access. So you can assign different roles to them, and those different roles, and that's usual normal users are just like this. Normal user, no admin access or anything like this. So you define some licenses which are assigned to them, which I'll show in a second, and then that's how the tenant knows what permissions to give them, like what applications to access, applications which are available in the tenant, and basically what computers to be joined, and so on and so forth. So that there's a lot here that I'm not unpacking. But purely from a Business Central point of view, you need to have created a user as an active user and assign a license to them. Now, you could also alternatively, or in addition to giving them a license, give them some level of admin access. So for example, the global administrator, and you should have very few of these because that basically means this guy has access to the whole tenant, can create new users, assign permissions, and so on. That's a very dangerous, or only a few people should have it. But a global administrator can access Business Central even if they don't have a license. They can do very limited things with it, like adding other users, but it is one of the roles that can do that. There is also, if you scroll down and say click show by category, you will eventually find here a Business Central one. It's somewhere towards the second half of the list. Where did they put it? Forget where they put it. Yeah, there you go. Dynamics 365 Business Central Administrator. So that's intended for those special cases where, for example, if you're a customer and you have a partner like my company that are assisting you, then you would create what's called a relationship, a partner relationship with them, and you can assign to them this instead of the global administrator. There's actually 3 or 4 different roles you can assign other than the specific Business Center one. But specifically for partners that manage your tenant, you want to give them access to your tenant so they can log in using their own users. So you don't have to create users for the partner, like me, if I'm assisting your company. And you, instead of giving them a global admin on one of the other admin levels, because you kind of have to do that, you can give them just the Business Center administrator, which means they can log in and do pretty much everything they need to do for Business Central, but they have basically no admin privileges for the tenant itself, which is exactly why this has been created. That's kind of a new thing from, I think, less than a year ago. But you can also assign this to your internal users as well. So if you want certain users to have access to the admin center, so from here or directly whatever your tenant is here, and Business Central Dynamics, your tenant, and an admin. So to be able to create, backup, restore, delete environments, i.e. databases, they will need some kind of an administrator role. So one of these roles, and the Business Center administrator is exactly the one you can give them to have access to the admin center and administer. So if you have a user that you don't want to directly make administrator of the tenant, but you want them to administrate Business Central, this is the role we can assign to them. So I can do this for this guy. And then this guy technically doesn't even necessarily need a Business Central license. This will be enough for them to sign in, at least be able to go to the admin center and do the main maintenance tasks. If you, however, want them to also be able to work as a normal user, as in log in, create documents, post, and so on, then you need to go to this tab, licenses and apps, and assign a license. So I'm in a CDX trial environment, so I'm using trial licenses, of course, these are not paid ones. But assigning the license here, saving the changes, and then basically this is what will allow a user to log in. And I'm actually logged in here with this specific user. So you can see here, student 71. And what license or how a user is logged in, you can check by going here to the users section. And depending on the permissions, maybe I don't have access to see this, but normally you will. So let's go to user 71. And you can hear there's a bunch of permission sets, which is the majority of what we're going to be talking in this video. But you also have, if you scroll down, which you need to do through here, licenses. You can see here I have a Business Central license here. If I go to the other screen, which is here where I'm signed up with my administrative account, and if we go to the same place, users, you can see that for the admin, I do have the license, but you also have here a line called internal administrator. So this is what could have allowed me to sign in here even if I didn't have a license. I'm not going to do a demo for this. You can trust me, you can try it yourself. So it does work. Again, not having an actual license will limit the amount of things you can do after you signed in, but it will allow you to sign in and do a bunch of administrative tasks. So from a permissions point of view, that is actually the first thing you do is you create a user and then you assign a certain license to them. Now, there are different types of licenses and there are different types of roles you can assign in addition to a license, like the Business Center Administrator, Global Admin. So there's several different ways of a user to get access to Business Central. And depending on what they are, you can actually set up something called license configuration, which is, it's pre-configured, but this is essentially the default ways of signing in. So you can see a delegated admin agent from a partner, delegated help desk agent. So that's the other role that I mentioned other than Business Center admin agent. This is the Business Center admin agent. So this will be the global admin essentially. So as I mentioned, 3 types of roles that can be assigned, however, to a partner. So these 3 would mean that that's for example, me signing into your tenant with a user that's in my tenant. So external user signing into your tenant or domain. And they can have one of these 3 roles. So this will mean they still get access to Business Central. And then internal administrator is always your global admin. And then you have the various license types. So Business Center Premium Partner Sandbox, that's a special license. And then you have the team members, you have the normal premium, you have the essential financials actually. And then essential, and then you have the attach licenses, which are the new types, which is, for example, if you have an other Dynamics 365 license, like the sales one, like a CRM license, instead of, if you have a full CRM license, you don't have to buy a full Business Central license. You can just buy what's called an attach license. So just a much lower cost, just attach the functionality for BC to CRM. And by the way, you can do the reverse for the other products as well. So it's, again, kind of a new thing they did about a year and a half ago, I think. I won't go through all of these because I don't even remember all of these. But essentially, these are the different types of access that could be granted to a user to log into Business Central. So as you can see, some of them are different types of licenses that can be assigned, but some of them are admin level roles that can be assigned to the user. So the idea is whenever you sign in, depending on why or which one of these you have. So for example, if I am a partner signing into a customer's environment, their admin could have set up that if I have, for example, this help desk agent, or let's say the BC admin agent role, you can open this, and this means any user that logs in for the first time, they will automatically be assigned these permission sets. And the permission sets are the main building block of what are you able to do within Business Central after you sign in. So, and we'll talk about how you create them, how you define them, and so on. But essentially, the different users here, the different user types, depending on how and what permissions they were given before they sign in for the first time to Business Central, the first time they sign in, they will automatically be assigned this set of permissions, which will allow you to do certain actions. And the reason I'm showing you this is because this is one of the first things you may want to configure when you set up a new environment, and you're the admin responsible. You may want to go here and you can say you want to customize the permissions. And so for the internal global admin right now, they can do all of these things. In quite a few of my customers, what the internal global admin actually is able to do is they're kind of a super user. So you can assign this, and then we'll talk about company and so on. But Of course, it's not ideal to give super users, so you should have more specific permission sets assigned to different users. But this is essentially what you can do. You can add a new line here and essentially, or remove some of the existing ones. And this means if a user signs in for the first time, you can define what permissions are automatically assigned to them just because they sign into the system. So you can give higher or lower permissions that they initially have. So you kind of have to be aware of this, because even if you don't manage it, it's there by default. There are certain automatic setups defined here. And if you're wondering, okay, how come I created a user and then they can automatically do more stuff than they were supposed to do, that's probably why, because they were automatically assigned user permissions through this license configuration. So it's a cool feature, really can save a lot of time, but can also create unexpected circumstances. So the main thing you define essentially, and you can kind of fix this by managing how and when users get access to the environment. So the specific environment, the specific database has this list of users. You can go to this page, and whenever you create a new user in the admin center here, right? If you can create a user here, give them the role and or license that you need them to, and then you can directly send them the URL to the environment, and then they can click and they will sign in, and they will be automatically added to the users list and will be automatically granted whatever permission sets are assigned to this type of user, depending on the license configurations that we just mentioned, right? The alternative to that is, as soon as you create the user, you can come over here to the users page and you can click update users from Microsoft 365. So what this is going to do is it will, and you see, if we just go back, you see it already prompts you here to check the configure licenses. So that's the reason why it's telling you, because all the users you'll be adding here, they'll be granted these permission sets. So essentially what this will do is it will go and check if there were any new users. In my case, there are some changes. So for example, I just granted a new license, and this will just update this information in the screen. And I've maybe created new users and so on and so forth. So any new users which were created will be added here. And this is usually just read-only, and in some cases this could ask you, there could be an extra step in this process which can ask you, do you want to change, do you want to append something new that you added, or do you want to keep the old value? So it's basically a control step where you can see what changes were done, and you can approve or disapprove them. And most of the time it just tells you, okay, these are the users, they are added, there's nothing you can do, and I mean, you can cancel the adding if you want to. And then once a user has been added, the only thing you can do here is, if you want to, you can deactivate, like you can disable a user, and you see it tells you to permanently disable it. You actually have to go to the Microsoft 365 admin center, which is this guy over here. And then that's how you properly deactivate the user. But you can deactivate them from within Business Central specifically also, while keeping the user as an active user otherwise. So this will be where you manage the user individually, and these permission sets are the primary way of you controlling what can this user actually do within the system. So just to do a quick recap, you need to create users in the admin center, or you need to have created a trust relationship with another tenant, like a partner, to allow other users to log in to Business Central by giving them special roles. And users that are created in your tenant need to have a license. Users that are external don't need a license, but they need to have one of those admin level permissions groups that I mentioned earlier. So this will be, if we, there you go, these rows, this kind of moves around. So the external ones would automatically get one of these admin accesses, usually preferably the Business Central admin for a Business Central partner. Or you can make them global administrators as well, if you want them to manage creating users as well. And then this will grant them access to Business Central, so you don't necessarily need to give them a license for that. There would still be some limitations to what these can do, and you can Google Business Central delegated admin, and there is a really nice article here which explains the different roles you can assign and what are some limitations as to what the delegated admins can do. There are certain things that they cannot do, so they cannot run job queues, they cannot trigger webhooks, and I think if you want them to actually, I mean, they can still post actually, so they're pretty much normal users, but there are certain actions that you can't do with them. And I think they, I think we can run this function, but you're supposed to be using external accountant, which requires a special license as well, if you want to have a different type of delegated user. So we're not going to go into this right now. So anyway, you create the users in the tenant, you assign them the right permissions or groups, or invite them however they need to, and then eventually they end up in this users list, right? And then each user, as soon as they are added, this either happens for the users which are within your own tenant by running this function, or you can just give them the URL, they click, and the first time they click, they'll be automatically added here. And then they're assigned some permission sets depending on the license configuration, right? So I've mentioned these permission sets a few times, and that's actually the key of how you define what the user can do within the system. So we might as well just go and check this. Let's go over here. So that's a list of the permission sets, and they're defined by several types. So you can have the system ones, which are the ones which are built in. And they generally come from Microsoft, from the built-in apps that you have. And you can have, and let me just open another environment here. Actually, can I do it? Just a second. I want to go into an environment that has some of our custom apps. So there's certain permission sets which will be automatically added by various add-ons that you install, so apps or extensions, depending on which term you want to use. They will also typically add their own permission sets. So if we go to, well, that's a bit slow. Permission sets. We have the system ones, but then you have this type, which is called extension, right? So this is a permission set that comes because there is an extension that has been added to this. And they work pretty much the same. It just, that's the source where it comes from. And I think I've created new ones here, but then of course you can create a new one, and then you see this will be the user defined type. And that's what we'll be playing with a little bit later. So if you want to filter by the type, you see that these are the three types. So system ones are the built-in that come from Microsoft for the base apps that are installed just by getting a new environment set up. Extension ones are ones that come from extensions that you install, and those could be third-party extensions or ones you build yourself. In some cases, you kind of, especially if you certify an app in the Microsoft App Source, you kind of have to provide the next permission sets that allow you to work with the app. And then the user defined are the ones that we're going to create with you. So this is the basis of how permissions are assigned. So how do these actually work? Well, let me go ahead and show you one of the most commonly used ones. So this is the basic one. As you can see, there's a description here called basic access. So if you open this permission set, you'll see that it does several things. It has several sections. So you have a section here with permissions, which is where the main individual permissions are assigned, and you can see object types, and we'll talk a little bit more about them later. And for these object types, you have basically read permission, insert permission, modify, delete, and execute. And again, we'll talk a little bit more about them. So this is the main section where the permissions that this permission set allows, and you can see there's include and there's an option for exclude, so it can get a bit complicated, but trust me, it's not that bad. But then there is a second section below, which is called permission sets. So you can essentially say, okay, this permission set that I'm creating includes certain permissions that I'll assign through it, but I kind of also want it to inherit permissions which are defined in other permission sets. So you can kind of create this hierarchical structure. As you can already guess, maybe this permission has set includes in this section on it link to a third permission set, and so on and so forth. I'm not aware if there's a specific limit here, but yeah, essentially it's kind of like Russian dolls. A permission set can link to another permission set and inherit its permissions, and then that one points to a fourth one, and so on and so forth. You can also add a permission set and say, by the way, exclude everything that's in it. So you can have two ways of using this. And as a result here, you have certain permissions which are allowed. And yeah, this is the result of adding these guys here, essentially. So that's kind of the structure of how you do it. You create a permission set in which you list the objects to which you want to give permission, and I'll explain this in a few seconds in a more detail. And then in addition to that, optionally, you don't have to do it, but optionally you can say, oh, in addition to everything I just manually added in my permission set, also add or specifically exclude the permissions which are defined in another permission set. Now you might be wondering, why do I need to do this part with the permission sets? Well, think about it this way. You can have a very big permission set that has a lot of permissions in it, and you can add it here so you don't have to one by one list a lot of maybe thousands of objects and give permissions to them one by one. But then you want to say, but I don't really want to give permissions to everything in that big permission set, so I kind of want to have a smaller version. And then you can either list here the individual objects to which you want to exclude permission from the big one, or you can take another smaller permission set and say, grab the big one, but exclude everything from this smaller second one. And this can, as a result, give you a new permission set, which is kind of the difference of those two. And in addition to that, you can either remove individual objects here. So that's kind of the main logic behind how this works. So let me give you a very short example, and I'll use this as a chance to explain how the permission sets and the various objects work. So Sami1, and then we're gonna go in it, click permissions. And what you can do here is, I can see it's completely empty. By default, it's set up to include whatever I'm going to add here, and it's the main object type is going to be object data, main, or the default one. And when the object ID is 0, no matter what object type you've selected here, that by default means all objects of this type. So if I add, if I change this and make it table, you see it automatically says all objects of type table. If I make it report, so essentially leaving this line the way it is, I'm giving the by default permission to all reports, right? Or all code units, or all tables, or all table data, right? So you have to be very careful. Leaving a line with object ID 0 can be great if you want to give a very broad permission set that gives permission to a lot of things, but it can be extremely dangerous. So as a general rule, you have to make sure you do not have one of these unless you specifically want to do it. So let me very quickly explain what's the difference between these. So we'll start from the top. So table data is the data that's contained within tables. That's essentially the information that's contained within the database. And it's linked to the tables, and it can be kind of confusing because you have the table to which you can give permission, but then you can not give permission to that person for the table data. And the main difference is that if you have the table, the only thing you can give permission to is the execute. You kind of cannot give read, insert, modify, or delete permissions. We'll talk more about them later. You can basically allow this person to execute or kind of open the table itself. So you can think about it like this. If I open an Excel spreadsheet, no, that was not the idea. If we open a new Excel spreadsheet, the table object is essentially, it's still thinking. Okay, so the table would be allowing you to open the worksheet, for example. If we have a bunch of worksheets here, right? So imagine these are tables. So me giving you access to execute the table means you get access to kind of run the sheet, right? And then you still need to have permission to access the data that's on the worksheet. So that's the table data. So the difference between being able to open the table or the table data is the table is kind of the Excel file that contains the data within it. So I can give you access to open the file, and maybe individual sheets can be individual tables, right? So if I give you, think of the environment, the database that you have in Business Central as a big Excel spreadsheet, right? Like a big file. So giving you access to table 0 means I'm allowing you to execute, open the file, and have access to all the worksheets. Alternatively, I can say, no, I actually don't want you to have access to all the worksheets. You can open the file, but you can only open the currency and maybe the payment terms, right? So there are many more worksheets in my file, but I only want you to have access to these two, right? So let's rename this currency. And this will be payment terms, and maybe spell this one correctly. But there is another one which is called customers, right? So my assigning the execute permission to the individual tables means that I allow you to open this file, but only have access to these two and not open the other table. Just open the table, not read the data, just being able to open the table and do things with it. So this is the extent of what this does. Me giving you table data, sorry, this should have been, it's kind of messy. You need to define this in the beginning. So let's go with table, and this will be 3, right? Okay, so I'm giving you access to open the worksheets themselves, the tables. Me giving you access to the table data, however, is what will allow you to actually read, and maybe if you only have read, this means you can open the currencies and see code and description, right? So if you run the object, you can kind of be aware of that there is such a table and maybe even run it, but you still get an error message if you try to open a page that's called a payment terms page in Business Central through the client, because you need to have permission to read the data which is within it. So if you want to have, I don't know, payment term 1, 2, 3. So yeah, I know I'm not very imaginative this morning. So having access to the table data means you can actually read these and you can see what the data is inside. So that's the read. Giving you access to insert means I'm also allowing you to come here and create a new line, right? This is what the insert allows you to do. Insert a new line and create a new record in this table. Me giving you access to a permission to modify means in addition to inserting, you can go to one of these and change an existing record. So read means that you can see the records. Insert means you can add new records. Modify means you can change existing records. So there is a chance where you can create new ones, but you will not be able to modify something that you just created, which is strange, but there are scenarios where this could be helpful. And delete means I'm actually giving you permission to take one of the existing records and just delete it, remove it. There could still be other permissions within the environment, within the database, that can stop you from actually doing the deletion, like checks, validations, and so on, but you are generally able to perform this action with this table. So this is kind of, I hope it makes sense. This is kind of how it works. You need to have access to the table to even be able to know that there is a table like this. So you can have access to the table data. If you don't have access to the table, then you still can't do anything with the table data. You can have access to the table. If you don't have access to the table data, then you cannot read the data that's in the table. So the table is kind of the object, the thing that contains the information, and table data is the information itself. And then the information, you can have access to read it. You can have access to insert new information in this table. and you can have access to modify the data in the table or delete it. That's kind of the 4 levels of access you can have on the table data type object. On the all the other object types, you can only have execute permission. That's kind of the main division. And now you might have noticed, and then basically giving permissions is a matter of assigning the right combination of table and table data. As a general rule, what you would do is you would normally, just as a simplest way of doing it, you would generally just assign a table data 0, because it's generally kind of harmless for them to be able to open the tables, because as I mentioned, if you don't have access to table data, you still can't do anything with it. So as a general rule, you would have at least one permission set that has access to all the objects of type table. And then where you're limiting the permissions of the users is on the level of the table data. And you're defining which table data are they actually able to work with. And then you can decide, are they able to read it? Are they able to insert? Are they able to modify? Are they able to delete? That's kind of the general way of how this works. Now, there are, however, other object types. So you have also something called pages. And I just mentioned me having access to the payment terms and opening a page. So what the users actually interact with when I open the payment terms here, what I'm actually opening is not the table itself. If you press Ctrl and F1, or there's a harder way to get to the page inspection, you can see that, yes, this is indeed the table payment terms, but I'm actually interacting with a page, which is called payment terms. So pages are, those of you who have worked with Access in the past might find this familiar. They're kind of a form. They're a way to visualize the data in the table. So this page is pretty much a table type of page. So this is exactly how the table would look like if you were able to open the table itself. But for other things like the customers, you see you can have multiple pages for the same table and the same table data. So if I open the customers, this is again a table representation, but this is not the full table, because the table actually contains more than 100 fields in it. You're just seeing a bunch of them, which are pre-selected for you to visualize for the page. So that's, and also this page has additional sections to it, which could take data from other tables, like these are completely other tables, posted sales, credit memos, and so on, to show it so it's a more user-friendly representing the data. So pages are a special type of object that allow you to see the data from one or more tables in one screen. But it can also completely rearrange the data. So of course you should be familiar with the customer card, which of course it's a completely different view, where one record is presented in a much more user-friendly way. So you can have different tabs, and the fields are organized in a much more friendly way than seeing the whole table. And if you're curious, I can kind of show you the table. You can open the customer table, and that's how it kind of looks from the user interface. So this is the table, and as you can see, there's quite a few fields here, and it's not the easiest thing to work with this, right? That's where pages come into play. So going back to the permissions, essentially what you're doing is you're saying, okay, oops, that is not what I wanted to do. You're saying, okay, you generally give permission to all the tables, that's fine. And then you define which table data they're able to run. But they also need to be, the user needs to be able to execute the pages through which the data is visualized. So again, most of the time we will just give the page 0, essentially give access to all the pages. But this is where you can start to get a little bit tricky. And there are certain pages which might show a bit more information that you want certain users to see. And again, that depends on how your specific environment is customized. So just to give you an example, we have had cases where we hide the cost fields from the item card and from the item list, and we create special pages where these fields are visualized, and then you can allow only certain users to have access to the pages that have the cost. So this could be a reason why, and by the way, that's not the best way to hide the costs, just FYI, but that is one way we used to do it in the very distant past. So one way to allow only certain users to view the cost was essentially not allow them access to all the pages and list individual pages that they get access to. So on the table data level, a user could have access to the table itself, right, to execute the item list, for example. And then they could also have access to the table data for the item list and maybe even read, insert, modify, and delete. But maybe we don't want them to work with all the possible pages that visualize the data from the item. And that's how we hide the cost from them. At least that's one way. Again, not the best. There are certain exceptions where this will not really work, but it's one possible way. So this is one reason why you may want to limit which pages are visible to some of your users. Then the next object we're going to talk about are the reports. So they're kind of like the pages. They're a way to visualize data. And most of the time it's a way to visualize it so you can get to print it in a way. So most of the time when we're talking about reports, let's go with the items since I switched to them. Those will be anything that you can run and has some kind of, let's go with the other reports. Let's say, no, that's not the reports I want. What the hell? There you go, finance reports. So for example, inventory valuation. So that's a report usually has something called a request page. Not mandatorily, there are certain reports that can skip that step and directly show you something. But a report is a special type of object that allows the system to take data from one or more tables. In this case, it takes data from the item table, but also from the item, the value entries and a bunch of other entries, but generally it's value entries and an item card. So you can apply some filters, decide what data exactly you want to see. There could be various options that are like this one, and different reports can be vastly different and more complex than what I'm showing you right now. But essentially running the report, and then in this case just in a preview, will group the data and visualize it in a certain way, and I can directly send it to a printer or export it to Excel or whatever. So reports can be used also to import data if you want to. In short, there is to manipulate the data in a way. Most of the time to visualize it, grouped and aggregated and organized in a special way. So all the print layouts that you have, invoice, credit notes, packing lists, whatever you're using, they are reports. But also there are certain reports that are used to create data as well. So for example, if you're running the exchange rate adjustments at the end of each month, or more often if you need to, that will be a report that's calculating data, aggregating, and then creating new data based on this. You can have just visual reports like this just to show you and aggregating information. Then you can have the print layouts that you can actually export and send to your customers, and processing reports that do something with the data. So it's kind of the main reasons the report exists as an object. So again, you can just give access to all the reports in the system through the permission set, but you can also be more specific and say, well, there are some dangerous reports, like, okay, inventory valuation, you can run it as many times as you want. It won't do anything to your data. It's a good question. Do you want everyone to be able to see the total cost of your inventory? That might be confidential information, so that could be a reason to restrict access to it. But as a general rule, it won't harm the database itself. It might create extra database harmful information be available to someone. So depending on the scenario, you may want to limit access to it. But something like the adjust cost item entries, that is kind of a dangerous report, because this one will automatically go and check and make sure, depending on what the costing method is, that the cost that's inflowing from the system will outflow in the right way. So kind of if you're using FIFO, it checks whether the cost of the purchase has changed, so update the cost of goods sold as a simple example. It can get vastly more complex if you're running manufacturing. So again, this running the report itself will not harm the database per se, because the user doesn't really have control over doing anything harmful. They can just run it with a certain filter. However, depending on your setup, allowing somebody to run this by mistake in the middle of the working date, this will directly block anyone else from posting anything in the system. So that could be a bit of a problem. So you may want to forbid who is able to run this report. Running the adjust exchange rates report, depending on what filters you're running it with, however, can cause problems, because putting the wrong starting date and yeah, this can actually cause an adjustment to be posted and actual geo entries to be created. Can change the values of how invoices are shown for outstanding invoices. This is definitely something you don't want somebody that doesn't know what they're doing to be done. And there are, yeah, other reports like this. So depending on what the report is, you may want to be a bit more careful with who gets to run which reports. Again, most of the time, you just allow everyone to see all the reports, and then you control through other means, usually by just not training them what users can do. But the reports can also be dangerous. I mean, there's import reports you can use to import data, and then you probably don't want anyone to be able to run those. Now, talking about import, XML ports are the other main and often more common way of importing or exporting large data sets, large amounts of data. These can be, again, I'm not sure where I can show you one. Okay, I guess that's a report. So yeah, it's a bit tricky because most of the places where you click a button to import something, that's actually a report that you're running. In some cases, it can be an XML port. So I can't think of a good example right now. But yeah, those will be another way to import or export data. So again, you can limit who gets to run which of these through here. Menu suite, that's kind of almost an obsolete one. So as a general rule, we tend to just give access to menu suite 0. There isn't a very good reason why to limit anyone on that level. Simply because in the past that used to be the main menu. So the menu suite today is kind of, let me see if I duplicate this. Yeah, I know. So the menu suite is kind of, if you go here and you explore all, so this is the menu suite. It used to be a section here on the side of the screen which define which menu elements you get access to. So which modules or which departments, as they used to be called, do you get access to. And it's still kind of like that. So if you go here, if you see the menu suite, let me see, can I actually select? I'm not sure you can actually select anything here. Yeah, you can't really select. You either have access to it or you don't. So in the past, there used to be different levels of the menu. So that's where this, it's kind of leftover, obsolete thing. So as a general, you just have access to it, but you used to be able to limit and say, okay, for example, I don't want people to have access to the inventory and warehouse menu. So what this would do is, if when you're searching for elements which are only part of this menu, you just not find them through the search function. Again, today, this just doesn't work this way anymore. So as a general rule, you just always give access to the menu suite and that's it. Not a huge reason to limit that. Let me just go ahead and add the XML ports here. The other thing you have here are, we spoke about, let's see, table data report. Oh yeah, I skipped the code unit. So code units are kind of like the functions you have in the system. Again, as a general rule, there is no hugely good reason for you, at least most admins will not be aware of which code units you can safely remove. Usually need to be a developer to know which ones you can remove from this list. So these are the actual actions. So most of the time when you click a button and a function is performed, whether it's to prices that are calculated or just the release, I think it's somewhere here. When you're posting something or when you're using a release function or things like that, most of the time they're calling a code unit, and this is essentially where the code of the software is written. You can think about it this way. So those are like libraries with different functions that can be fulfilled, and usually a layman won't be able to know which code units to limit. So as a general, you allow all functions. And if there's reasons to forbid certain functions, it's usually easier to write custom code for it, because usually one code unit has multiple functions. So as a general, you don't want to forbid the whole code unit. So long story short, for 99.99% of the people, just always give all the code units. Now, you see page. Okay, queries. They are kind of like special. You can think of them as special pages slash reports. Most of the time, users will not see them, but they're very useful when you're visualizing data. So again, queries, you just allow them to see all the queries. There could be very special reasons why I want to limit certain ones from a user, but again, those will be special objects that they use to aggregate data like reports and present it either to an API. Actually, for APIs, that will again be a page, but yeah, I guess you can link it. So usually present it to a report so it runs faster or something like that. So no good reasons as a general rule. So think of them kind of like the code units. As a general rule, we just give access to all the queries. And then we get to the last one, which is the system. This is kind of a special type of object, which essentially defines what special system level functions, system layer functions you're able to do. What do I mean with that? Well, easiest way is to actually show you what are the options here. So a lot of this is inherited from the old desktop client that you used to have, where you actually had the file, edit, view menus, if you remember. So that's kind of how this is structured. That's where these come from. And as a general rule, we tend to allow the system 0 again. But let me show you a few. So even if you allow somebody to delete the database, that's actually not done from within the menu here. So it doesn't matter at this stage. Deleting databases happens from the admin pen central. So this one I think is kind of obsolete at this point. But you can kind of forbid somebody to create a new company, which would be, and I haven't actually tested not allowing this, but it would be interesting to see. This is essentially this function here, create new company. So you can forbid certain people to do it, and that could be a thing that you want to forbid, because a new company is a bunch of data that's created automatically, and you probably don't want everyone to be able to just go and do these. Same for renaming. Renaming SaaS is kind of forbidden anyway, so you kind of don't need that. But deleting a company could be a nice thing to forbid people to do. Now, I haven't actually tested if any of these would work with the new version, so it would be interesting if somebody can play with it. I'm not going to do it right now. Something that would be a good idea to the zoom, for example, is what used to be the name of the page inspection. So again, I'm not 100% sure if you can actually forbid the page inspection, but this could be a way to do it. So we can test it. One of the good ones that you may want to forbid is, let me see if I can find them. So the personalization was somewhere here. And again, there's other ways to do it. Let's see. Design. Yeah, so you have certain features here like designing, which I don't think would actually be something you can actually stop people from doing it. But yeah, design page, basic, advanced. This would potentially be these actions, personalizing. So yeah, you can play around with these. As I said, they're kind of personalized on behalf of. I'm not even sure how I can do this, but yeah, this will be interesting. Page script recording is this new function here that kind of allows you, I need to create a video on this one, that kind of create an automated script that can be fulfilled. So how to create a new customer, for example. So it can be used in some testings. So you can allow or forbid these. Data analysis mode would be this new mode where you have in any list that you have, you can click this button and go into data analysis mode. So you can forbid users from going into these. So as you can see, I fairly certain these could be related to the new AI agents they're introducing slowly. Snapshot debugging is a new feature that's also allowed. I think it's actually here. There you go. So yeah, there's a bunch of, it's not exactly low level, but they are related to certain things you can do from within the UI that you can forbid. And this is where it would be interesting to maybe not allow all of these, right? So the system is an option, a special type of objects that you may want to investigate, play around, and not allow zero by default. Again, most companies actually don't worry with that. And to be fair, I've seen way too many customers working with super users, which is not great. So we're trying to train them, and that's part of the reason why creating this video. But yeah, so short version for table, Codeunits, XML ports, menu suite, and queries. As a general rule, it's okay to have at least one permission set that has zero for them. And in fact, there is at least one of the standard ones that already will allow this. So that's fine. For table data, and is the main area where you will want to specifically, this is where you focus 99% of your time here, limiting which table data do you want to allow users, and then do you want them to be able to read, insert, modify, delete. And by the way, I haven't forgotten, I'll explain what the indirect one is. Then the system one is one that's more rarely, but this is one that I would encourage you to investigate and see maybe if there are certain sub options here that you want to exclude, so then not allow the zero. And potentially reports, you may want to limit certain reports, but again, it's not the end of the world if allow all of them. Just be aware that there are certain reports which might not be great for users to run. Something I should have mentioned when we were talking about the reports and pages, and if you don't have permission for the table data, then you will also not be able to run other functions that require this table data. So for example, if there is a report based on items, right now this permission does not give me, this permission set does not give me permission to work with anything related to items, right? So I will not be able to run any reports linked to items. That's kind of how this works. So that's why I said 99% of your time will be focused on the table data, and that will automatically exclude all the various functions. So I mentioned earlier, running the exchange rate adjust report could be dangerous. Well, guess what? If I'm not able to even to insert or run or generate geo entries, I'm not able to post, then I won't be able to run the report anyway. I'll get an error message when I try to run it. It's a bit more complicated than that, because I could be, if you're allowing me to post sales orders, then I am able to post geo entries. So that kind of by extension will allow me to run the report as well. So there's other things you may need to take into consideration, but there's links like that that you can check. Now, I mentioned the Codeunits, that there are some special functions, right? So they are kind of the reason why the indirect option exists here. So whenever you allow yes for table data on any of these 4 categories of permissions, this essentially means you're allowing the user to go to that table data, assuming they have access to the page that allows them access to it, and they can directly do this thing with this data. So right now I can go to the payment terms and I can create a new payment term, or I can create a new one. I can see all the existing ones. I can also modify an existing one, like change the code or description, whatever, and I can also delete an existing one. However, there could be reasons where, let's say, for example, I need to be able to post stuff. So if I need to be able to post a sales order, that means I will, by extension, need to be able to run with the, to work with the geo entry table, right? So, however, there could be reasons why you don't want me as a user to actually see the geo entries. Why? Because the geo entries also contain things like the salaries, and maybe you don't want me to see the salaries of the other users of the company. So this is where, well, I need to be able to post an order, and posting an order will create geo entries. So I need to be able to see the geo entries, also insert geo entries, right? And also, well, you won't normally be able to modify or delete, so maybe you can skip those. Again, you have to actually test later. But you don't want to allow me to actually post new entries. So I shouldn't be able to go to the general journal and post, right? Only through an order. And you probably don't want me to actually see the geo entries themselves. So this is where the indirect comes into play, because me posting geo entries doesn't mean I should be able to go and create them, means I should be able to do something that creates them. So me clicking the post button will run a code unit that will create the geo entries, that will see existing entries and maybe do something with them. So this is what indirect means. Indirect means I, as a user, cannot open the general ledger entry table, right? If I try to open this and I have indirect permissions, I will get an error message because I don't have the yes. But me having the indirect message allows the developers and Microsoft to allow a button that I press from another menu, like a sales order, for example, to go and see the geo entries and do something with them without showing them to me, right? Same with inserting them. So that's kind of what the indirect means. It means I cannot do it myself, but I can click something that will do it for me. So this is how you will be forced in some cases. So when you're setting up the permissions, you will at some point get an error message saying, okay, you need to give this user access to a table. And you might be thinking, well, I don't want this user to see the data in this table. And then you can do this, indirect. And of course, this might still throw an error message. So depending on how the developers wrote the code, they actually need to give permission to whatever that function is to do this table. So there's other elements, but that's beyond your control. So that will be a problem in how the code was written. But this is why the indirect exists. It basically means I want the user to be able to do something that fulfills this function, but I want the user to be able to do it directly and to see the result themselves. So this is kind of a really cool thing. So indirect is really important, and you have to learn and play with it. So essentially, when you're setting up permissions, a short summary is you're deciding which objects you want to give access to. For everything that is not table data, you only get to essentially say yes or indirect. I'm not sure you actually get to do this. So it basically has you need to list the specific objects you want to have here: tables, report, code units, pages, and so on. And it's only execute. You're basically only allowing the users to run the object. The table data is where you list the specific data that's contained within the table and visualized through the reports and pages and so on. And then you allow the users to read that data directly or indirectly, insert new data, modify existing data, or delete existing data. That's kind of how you give permissions. So essentially, each permission set, as a general rule, will contain a list of different table data plus tables, reports, code units, and so on, and give various permissions to them, and or include other permission sets so it can kind of incorporate the data assigned into other permission sets. So it's kind of, you create a permission set that gives a certain small subset of permissions. So essentially you have, let's say, let's go here, setup, Dynamics 365 company data setup. So what does this one do? Let's see. It allows you to open the payment terms, insert, modify, delete payment terms, currencies. You just insert them and delete them, which is interesting because you cannot read them and modify them. That's an interesting one. So you have a bunch of tables here, right? Actually, quite a few. But it also includes permissions from other permission sets. But you essentially adding this permission set to another one. Maybe that was a big one. Let's grab a smaller one. There you go. edoc core read. That's a smaller one. So you have a permission set that gives you access to only read certain table data. You see that this is all. So it just allows you to read this data. That's a very small permission set. I mean, it does include this one, which if we go to it, will probably, yeah, I can't do it from here. edoc core objects. Let's do this. Oh, come on. Oh, really? Where is the core object? That was interesting. Oh, I guess that's the name. Interesting. I don't see this one. That's a fun thing. Yeah, I've actually seen that before, where I don't actually see a permission set here. Anyway, I'm not gonna investigate this too much, but essentially you have this permission set which gives you access to just read these tables, right? So I can create another one that gives me access to write specific of these tables. Just add the insert permissions or modify permissions, right? So then I can create another permission set that is only for writing. I'm guessing this is this one, which gives you, you see, only for those specific tables, just gives you no read, just insert, modify, and delete permissions. So then I can allow user to have those two at the same time. Well, rather than me having to select those two individually, I can create a third one that incorporates both of them into it. And I'm guessing that is this one probably. Yeah, you have the read incorporated in it, and it does gives you a bunch of modify for the same tables, right? And then probably the basic one incorporates both of these. So yeah, you have the read incorporated in it, and you have a bunch of indirect here. Okay, so it's you can create other permission sets that group. So in the end, you only assign one of these to a user, and then it inherits all the other permission sets. So it makes it easier when you're creating a user, right? Remember, in the end, we started from the fact that we have the users here, and for each user, we have to define, okay, what should this person be able to do? And you have to select one or more permission sets here. So if you want to make your life easier when you're defining a new user, you can create a grouped permission set, which you just select one of these, and then it inherits a bunch of other smaller permission sets in it. And that could be one way to define it, but then you have to be careful. And the smaller ones will allow you to have more granular assigning permissions. So if a user already has one permission set and you want to give them something small additionally, you can just add a small permission set here that just gives that extra little bit of permissions on top. So that's kind of how this all comes into to play, to work together, right? In the end, you have these small building blocks of permissions based on which you assign them to users. And the way it works is, actually I can show you. A very important tool you should learn to work with is if you select a user, you can click here, effective permissions. And this will be a very helpful tool to allow you to see, okay, does this user have access to a certain object in the system? And if yes, why? What gives him the permission to work with this object? And then you can see, okay, is that the wrong permission set, or is that maybe what's the reason? So for example, payment terms, this user effectively has access to read, insert, modify, and delete. Why? Well, and then you can see by permission set, well, he has the super permission set. So this allows him all of these permissions. And then entitlement is basically the license. You can think of it this way. So if this user is assigned the super role, but for example, he has a team member, then if we go to a certain table that is not allowed for team members, then he can have yes from the super, but the entitlement will kind of decrease, and the effective permission here will be the smallest one, right? So that's kind of why the entitlement is important. But there are cases where for certain tables you might have the permission for this table coming from more than one permission set. So if we go to, I guess this guy just has the super, so let me just go with student 71. Okay, let's go with effective permissions. And we're gonna see. Yeah, that takes a while. That's also sandbox environment, so it's not the fastest. Okay. No, I guess I just assign super to them, and that's as easy as that. But okay, there will be cases where here you can see multiple permission set that gives you access to the same table, and then you can decide which one you want to remove. But The way it works is if this user has multiple different permission sets and you have one permission set that removes permission from a certain table, or you have a permission set that has very limited permissions, and then you have another one that has higher permissions, the system will always give him the most permissions that all of these sets allow. So the super row is one that you have to be extremely careful. As the name implies, it has all permissions. So basically it has all the objects with 0. It can do everything everywhere in the system. There's no limits. So it doesn't matter that I have these limited permission sets that give me very small sections of permission. The fact that I have the super automatically means I can do everything. It doesn't matter that I have the other ones. So that's kind of how it works. You can assign multiple different permission sets. The system will find the most permission all of the sets allow. So if you have one set that specifically removes the permission from another permission set that's included in it. So for, let me go back. So here I can say, okay, I have these permissions, but also include the, I don't know if it will allow me to include the super. Fairly certain it will not. Yeah, you cannot include the super. Let's say this one. I can say include this one, but exclude the permissions from another one, right? These two don't work together, but anyway, just for the sake of the example. So let's say that's a subset of these tables, right? This is 10 tables, and there's 2 of these that are here are excluded here. So basically saying I want this guy to just get 8 of the tables from here, right? This makes sense, right? But if additionally on the user card you directly assign this permission set to the user, then this line no longer matters, because in this row I have given them only 8 of the 10 tables from this permission set because these 2 are excluded, but that's from this permission set. But if you also add a separate line with this one in the user directly, then from that row he gets the 2 tables additionally added on top of these 2 being excluded. So you have to be careful which rows you're assigning on the user level. So whenever the system is looking, okay, what can a user do? They will look at the user card and check all of these permissions, essentially find the highest level of permission, and then allow you to do whatever you need to do there. Something additional that's important here when you are assigning the permission sets is the company. So I kind of skipped that earlier as well. You can assign permissions and then limit for which company are they allowed. So this user is super user in the Codeunit, that's a misspelling of the company name, but anyway, in the Kronos demo company, right? But in all the other companies, he can only do these things. Well, actually in the my company. So technically this user doesn't even know about the other companies. He can see the Kronos demo and he can see the my company. These other ones don't exist for him because he doesn't have a permission set for them. However, if I do this, now he's super in all the companies and it doesn't matter that he has these other smaller permission set, right? And then you can say, okay, but I want him to be super in this one and this one. Then you have to add 2 lines here. You can say, okay, he's super in this company, and then you need to add another super for the other line. But just be aware that super also means that this user can log into this company and kind of give himself permission. So this can be a little bit tricky. So you generally don't want to allow super users unless you really want this person to be super, to be able to do everything. So that's one thing to be aware of. The other thing I want to add on top of everything we've discussed so far is the fact that in the permission sets, there's one more thing you can do. In addition to excluding, and again, you can do this here. Let's go into edit mode. So you can actually say I want to exclude this table from the permission because another permission set is giving this. So again, as I mentioned, this is something you can do. So in addition to giving access to tables, you can actually use something called a security filter. So if we go here, payment terms, you have a bunch of codes, right? So I can say, no, he only has access to the 21 days. You can go here and say, I want to apply a filter based on any of the fields here. In my case, I'm going to use the code. I'm gonna apply this filter. This means this guy only has access to this code. And how this works is I'm going to actually try and demo this, but this is gonna be very hard. So let's see if we can do this. So in the student 71, we're gonna add the Sami permission for the Chronos demo. Now, where it gets a little bit tricky is this user already has the business premium. So if we go here, this has a bunch of other permission set that's probably, okay, full access is probably the one we actually need. Already gives them access to a bunch of tables that have pretty big permissions. So I'm not sure, they should have access to the payment terms without a limitation. So let me try, but I'm fairly certain this will not work. So I'm logged in here with the user 71. I may need to remove some other permissions before this can be demoed correctly. And if we go to payment terms, yeah, I can see all of the records here. That is because my business premium actually gives me access to a lot. And I also have super. So let's go ahead and delete the super and the business premium as well. I'll probably not even be able to log in, but let's see. Yeah, could not open the company. Okay, that's because, oh yeah, of course. We need this to be for the Chronos demo. Yes. Okay, let's try again. So we have this, and let's see what the other ones allow. So as you can see now, all of a sudden, most of my options here disappeared. And if I go here into explore more rows, I can still see most things, but not really. So if I go here, customers, I can't really see the customers because I don't have permission for the page or the table or whatever. But if we go to payment terms, I should be able to open them, and I only see the one payment term. So that's how the security filter works. And we can allow more. So I can go to permission sets and go into my permission set, go into edit mode, and we can say everything that starts with 2. You can do this as well. And if we go here, I don't know if just pressing F5 will work. No, I think I need to refresh. Kind of re-login. If we go to payment terms, still gives me 21 days. What the hell? I think there were others. Yeah, I should see 2 days and 21 days. What the hell? Did I not save this? Okay, let's try to sign out. Be interesting if it doesn't work with the asterisk. Just a second. Oh. It actually did sign me out. Yeah, that's fine. Oh, there you go. Okay. So yeah, in some cases you need to actually sign out, sign in to see the updated permission. So yeah, you can use the security filters to be more precise. So not give access to the whole table, but only to individual records. Now you kind of have to be careful with this one because um, you are not always aware of when and how a table is used. So allowing this permission right now only to see the payment terms with these types could be fine, but maybe there is a function or report that this user is supposed to be able to run where you want him to see customers that have other permission payment terms, and then this could throw an error message because the system is trying to access another record that has a payment term to which he doesn't have access, and because he doesn't have access to the payment term, he cannot see the record that has assigned a different payment term, so he can't see a customer with a different payment term. So this could be a dependency that could cause an error, so you have to be kind of careful with how you're doing this. But yeah, for example, this could be a way to limit which locations, for example, a certain user can work with, and can be a very, very useful tool. Now, from all of this, you're probably already quite scared and you're thinking, okay, how the hell do I know all the tables? How do I know all the right pages? Like, how do I do this? Now, there's several things I want to show you. First, if you actually want to know what table and object something is, you can just go there. For example, you can open the customers or whatever page, press Ctrl Alt and F1 on your keyboard, and you have the page inspection, which will typically tell you, okay, what is the table number, so name and number in brackets, and then what is the page that you're looking at. And if you run a report, let's say this one, for example, then it will tell you that's a report, so you know the name and the number of the report. So for most objects, you can find this way what you're working with. And then you can work your way back. So essentially, if you want to give access to a certain user to do certain things, you can just go find the pages and the tables, and what you're actually looking for is the table data for table 18, not necessarily the table. As I said, you can generally allow table 0 execute permissions. That should be fine. However, that would still probably take quite a bit of time, right? So what you're normally supposed to do, and I'm gonna show this by creating a second one, is create a permission set, and then you can go into it, and of course you have to do this in a test environment, not in the production, for obvious reasons that will become apparent in a second. And you don't have to do anything else other than just click more options, actions, and then you have this really nifty option here called record permissions, right? So you just click start, and it says, do you want to start recording now? And then from now on, it will record everything you're doing. So keep this page open, and just on top of this, start going to the areas, to the things that you want this user to be able to do. So if I want this user to be able to open the customers list, I just go and open the customers list. If I want them to view a customer, I just open the card and click here. If I want them to see ongoing sales quotes, I click and open ongoing sales quotes. If I want them to see the actual quote with the lines, then that's fine. If I want them to actually be able to insert a new line in a quote, then I do that, right? And you need to click and insert, although all the actions that you want this user to actually be able to do. So if I want them to be able to select the location, I should do that as well. If I want them to be able to look up prices, then you should probably scroll down and check the sales prices. So you can, in this case, there's 0, so it doesn't do anything. But if you want them to see sales price lists, for example, you may want to open this and open a specific sales price list, and so on and so forth. If you want them to be able to assign item charges or do work with item tracking, go through these menus and click. So basically make sure you open every page that you want them to be able to open. If you want them to do something like create a new customer, for example, make sure you do click the create new customer and go through the act of actually creating one. So do all the actions that you want the user to be able to do, then go all the way back and go record and say stop, and it's gonna say, do you want to add the recorder permissions? Click yes, and just like that, it's going to generate a bunch of lines with the objects that you just interacted with. So you can see I have the payment terms because they are only in read permission, because on the customer card you have payment terms and you have all of these other tables in read. But customer I have insert and modify. I don't have delete because I did not delete a customer, right? If you scroll down, you have sales header read only because we didn't actually create a new quote, but we do have modify and insert on a new quote, on existing quote, because we did add a new line. So, right? So if I can then click record, I can say, well, I forgot something, and then we can go and say sales order, and we can click create a new sales order, and maybe even select a customer, right? And we already have the insert lines, so we can just go back and say stop, and now I have insert for order. I didn't modify anything on the existing one, so again I might have to go back. So essentially we can do this, and you can see it will also include the tables that you opened. You might be wondering, why the hell do I have the vendor? Well, because I was looking at the item card, probably. Oh, on the customer card you have balance as a vendor. So anyway, you have a bunch of tables, you have a bunch of code units, a bunch of pages, and so on and so forth, right? Now, and you might say, great, so I have a permission set, so now I can assign this permission to somebody. So let's say, for example, we go here and we say Sami2, and if we assign it without a company, then they can work in all the companies. So remember, I only had these two payment terms and I don't see customers or anything like this. Let's see if just refreshing will allow me to do that. Okay, now all of a sudden I have items, customer, chart of accounts. So I can go here, and I was able, by testing the permission, to insert a new customer, but now it says table data dimensions read blah blah. I don't have this permission. So the fact that you went through the actions and then the recording does not mean you're done. You still need to assign the permission set to a user that has only the permission set you want them to work with, and go through the actions, and then you see there tends to be other things that need to be added. So in this case, I need to add this table 348 for at least reading. So I can go here, I can go to permission sets, let's say Sami2, going to edit mode, add a new line, and only add for reading because I don't want them to actually create new dimensions. So let's go ahead and refresh here. And in some cases you don't even necessarily need to refresh, but I find it's a good idea. So I can go to customers, and now voila, I can open a customer. Can I open an actual customer card? Yes, I can. Can I create a new customer? Let's try new, select. Yes, I can create a new customer. And now as soon as I validated the name, it says table data 5086. And this can get pretty frustrating. So that's why I tend to remind people it's not hard to do permissions, because it's honestly not that difficult. Oh, delete. Oh, wow. Why do I need to delete that? Duplicate delete. Okay, I'm not sure why, but okay. So I think we need delete permission here. And if you're not sure, you could try with Indirect first and see if it works. Just always go, oh no, that wasn't the right table. 58 something. Was it a new one? Yeah, that was a new one. See, so you have to go through. Oh, I do have it. 5086. Okay. 5086. There you go. And then you go back, and let's see if this just works. And this one says, okay, I think I may have to restart again. Let's see, this works now. Interesting. I'm fairly certain I gave this. Oh no, that's the other one. 585 now. And you have to be careful to read the whole message, because I was thinking at 86, it's asking for 85. Delete. Let's try again and see if the message changes. 5095. This is read. Okay, I'm not actually gonna go through it, but you get the idea. So there's a bunch of other things that need to be added. And it could be just because when I was doing the permission set, maybe I just didn't do the actual insert of the name. So if I had done this, it would probably add these permissions. But I find it as a general rule, after recording the permissions, you still have to go through the actions again with the assigned permission set and add the missing steps. And as you can see, it's not hard. You just need to read the message and insert the permission. But as you can also see, it takes multiple iterations. So this can take quite some time. So it's not a difficult process. It just takes time going through this. And the more you do it, the easier it will be, and less frustrating, but it will still take some time to actually perform this. So it's kind of how assigning permissions works. So you need to create the right permission sets. You can group just be aware that grouping them can create this extra layer of, okay, I just assigned one permission set, but now it has nestled permission sets within it, and now which one of these is actually allowing me to do something that I don't want this user to do. So this is where maybe creating a new custom permission set could make your life easier. Just be aware that if you do that, there is a reason why the standard ones exist, and that's because Microsoft keeps modifying them. So these system ones, for example, every few months, there's a new table that's created somewhere, and Microsoft will just add it to one of these permission sets. So this is why, as a general, it's not a bad idea to add at least some of the standard ones as nestled in your new custom permission set you add, in order to avoid the situations where an update happened overnight and then your user starts screaming because they get an error message saying, oh, a new table is, I don't have it, and that's just a new table that Microsoft created. So you kind of have to have the nestled permissions, just be careful and manage them carefully. So that's a brief overview. I'm sure I've missed something that could be also important here, but I think as a general representation of what permission sets are, how they play, how they're linked to users, how you create new users, this will give you a good starting point. I've not spoken about the user setup because there's actually more than one, even though it's one table that you can access from multiple areas. I am logged in with the wrong user, right? But that is, of course, another place where you can define limitations on what users can work with. So there are some certain standard limitations here, and then you can add custom ones as well. I'm not going to go through each one of them right now, and most of them have good help explanation. Something else I will briefly mention is I have another video where I've explained in a bit more detail how you can use the profiles, the roles, to be personalized, right? And you can basically show any field in any page, like any field from a certain table in any page that's linked to that specific table. And I have a separate video. There'll be a link in the description below. Something you should be aware of, that something you can do is when you're creating a new profile here, and you can, by the way, copy an existing one and just then customize which pages are visible there, and then you can actually disable personalization. So when you assign this profile, and that's basically what you do by users going to my settings and assigning the profile here, the role, something that you can, by the way, do centrally as well. you can go to user settings, and then you can see for each user what is the role that's assigned to them, and you can actually modify this for them if you're an admin. And what you can do is you can basically say all the users that have a certain profile, you can disable personalization for them, which basically means they don't get to use this button. So that can be a very powerful option, because what you can do is essentially show the pages and show the fields in the pages that you want these users to be able to work, remove the personalization, and then you can allow them to have access to all the pages theoretically. If you've already removed them from access, then you're good to go. So that's another way to kind of modify permissions. But other than that, the permission sets are your best friend. And I know it can be a bit frustrating, but it's just about details. The actual mechanics of how you do them, it's not that difficult. Now, those of you working with older versions, especially if you're on-prem or if you have not disabled, I believe that's still a feature you can disable. I think it's auto-enabled for the last few versions, but let me just double check. No, I think they actually auto-enabled it. Okay, so those of you who are with a few versions back, I think maybe version 23 or maybe even 24, you had here a feature which was to have the new, basically there used to be something called user groups, which allowed you to group permission sets into a group and then assign these groups to users. So you might have that additional tab in the users page. The new version just did away with that, and now you just have the permission set. So there used to be an extra tab here with the user groups, and assigning a user group would automatically put a bunch of permission sets here, but that's kind of obsolete by you being able to nestle permission sets within permission sets. So, but just be aware that the reason I'm not describing this is because, as I said, this video is based around software as a service, and yeah. If you're running on-prem, you also have a few other authentication methods. So there are ways for you to set up users directly within Business Central, and they do not come from the tenant. But I'm not going to cover this one. So there's blog posts and so on. If you're really interested, I could try and create a video for this later down the line. But with Microsoft pushing everyone on the cloud, I feel that's kind of gonna be obsolete quite soon. But yeah, there's a few more authentication methods. There's actually quite good articles from Microsoft on the topic, so yeah, let me know if that's something that's interesting. But as far as I'm aware, it's a very niche topic right now. So that was all for today. I hope you find this interesting, and as usual, if you like this, hitting the subscribe and like button will help these videos reach you easier. Have a good day.